The Lights over Blackwood Moor, inspired by the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. The ninth light cold came up out of the heather that night, not down from the sky. I remember that most of all, cold from below, working through wool and leather like water through a sponge. We had been lying there since 10 o'clock, Holmes and I, elbows pressed into wet ling on the shoulder of Blackwood Moor. Neither of us had spoken above a whisper in an hour. It was the third night. I had stopped asking why. Holmes had the stalking glass to his eye. I had a scrap of paper, a stub of pencil, and fingers too cold to hold either well. There, he breathed. Far off across the black ground, a point of pale light showed itself, low and steady, moving at no more than a walking pace. Then a second, behind it. Then a third. I began to count in a whisper, as I had counted the 2 nights before. 1, 2, 3. A fourth light joined the file, then a fifth, then a sixth, then a seventh, each one holding its place behind the last, like men roped together on a glacier. 7 lights, in a single moving line, crossing ground that no cart road touched. Same order as last night, I murmured. The short one still walks forth. Holmes said nothing. His whole body had gone still in the way that meant he was watching something I had not yet noticed. Then the lights stopped. All 7 together, in the space of 2 or 3 seconds, as though some voice I could not hear had given some order I could not hear either. I marked the time on my paper without looking down at it. 11 minutes past midnight. "They've reached the gate," I whispered. "Look at the gate itself," Holmes murmured. "Not at the file." I looked, and only then did I see it. An 8th light stood at the gate-post, low and quite still, so steady against the dark stone that I had taken it, if I had thought of it at all, for some trick of my own tired eyes. It was no trick. It was a lantern, set down and waiting. "Wait!" said Holmes again, and his hand closed over my wrist. That surprised me more than either light had. A moment later, a 9th light came up from a different quarter of the dark. It was low down and off to our right, from the direction where I knew, though I could not see it, the chimneys of the Ling and Feather stood black against the sky. It came on steadily, without haste, and joined the others at the gate, where the 8th light had waited for it. The wind had been at our backs all night, carrying the smell of wet moss and cold stone. For one breath it shifted, and brought with it the reek of raw spirit, sharp enough to catch in the throat. Then it was gone. The wind was more wind again, and the 9 lights stood clustered at the gate, as if waiting for something, or someone. I set down here, exactly as I set them down that night on a scrap of wet paper, 3 things and no more: that the lights halted all together at a gate in the wall, that a 9th light joined them late, from the direction of the inn, that for one breath the wind carried the smell of raw spirit across the open moss. I did not understand any of it, and I want that admitted plainly before I go one word further. A man who claims an understanding he did not have is no use to a reader who wants the truth of a case, and not merely its ending. To make sense of that gate, and those 9 lights, and the smell on the wind, I must go back some days. Back to a wire that came to Baker Street on a wet morning, and to a shepherd who had been dead since October, though neither Holmes nor I knew his name yet when that wire arrived. Chapter 2. The Wire from the County. For a week before that telegram came, Holmes had been intolerable. He had played the same 7 notes on his violin so many times that I had begun, against my will, to hum them in my sleep. 3 cigarette ends had joined an older colony on the mantelpiece. He answered any question I put to him with one word, if he answered at all, and once, memorably, with none. "You are bored," I said, on a grey morning, Over an egg I do not think he touched. I am starved, he answered, which is a good deal worse. He rose from the table and crossed to the window, where the Persian slipper hung on its nail by the fireplace, half emptied of its tobacco, a sure sign that he had been thinking too hard about nothing at all for several days running. He filled his pipe from it without looking at what he was doing. A man cannot manufacture crime to order, Watson, however badly he wants one. You have said as much before, usually just before one arrives. He gave me a dry look for that, and it was at that very moment, as if summoned, that Mrs. Hudson's step sounded on the stair. She brought up a telegram, and Holmes had it open before she had properly left the room. Now this, he said, is interesting. Everything is interesting to a starved man. Read it, and tell me if you agree. He passed it across. I read it twice. From a Ferris collector of customs Whitby to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street, London, stop excise returns Coast Road North, of Blackwood fallen away. 3rd season running stop. Local opinion blames more superstition. Stop board would value your views before winter. Stop Ferris. A customs man, I said, who does not believe in ghosts. A customs man who has noticed that ghosts are remarkably good at moving spirits without paying duty on them. Holmes was on his feet already, pulling a folder from the shelf behind his desk. It was marked, in his own hand, More Legends and Similar Frauds. I have had my eye on Blackwood since October, Watson, though I said nothing to you. Until this morning I had no client. Only a curiosity. He tapped the folder before opening it properly. There are 11 other entries in here, going back the better part of 20 years. A drowned tin miner in Cornwall, whose ghost was blamed for lights that turned out to be lanterns, carried by men running brandy past the Coast Guard. A vanished drover in the fens, and a marsh light that walked a towpath at exactly the pace of a laden barge. Superstition is a wonderfully cheap watchman, Watson, if a man is willing to let his neighbors frighten themselves for him. It costs nothing, asks no wages, and never once gives evidence in court. And Blackwood is the 12th entry. Blackwood is the 12th entry, and the first, I think, where the ghost may also have killed a man outright, rather than merely kept him from asking questions. I followed the coroner's verdict when it appeared in the county paper, filed it here, and thought no more of it. A dead shepherd and a haunted moor are 2 a penny in the north of England. It wanted a customs man's arithmetic to make the story interesting. What happened in October? A shepherd died. He found the cutting he wanted and passed it to me. Read it aloud. I like to hear these things said, not merely seen. I read it aloud. It was short, the way such things are in a county paper. Nathan Prowse, shepherd, of Blackwood, had gone out after his flock on a foggy night in October and had not come home. A search the next morning found nothing. A search a week later found him, in a bog pool a mile from the nearest safe path, his crook standing upright in the moss some distance off, as though he had set it down and walked on without it. The inquest had returned a verdict of misadventure. The fog and the treacherous ground were blamed. The coroner had added, more in sorrow than in evidence, that the moor folk called such deaths the doing of the corpse candles, lights that were said to walk before a death and lead the unwary from safe ground. A ghost story with a verdict attached, I said. Your county coroner does not usually put superstition into an official finding. He put it in because his witnesses had already put it into every conversation he tried to have with them. Holmes settled into his chair. A frightened witness makes a poor witness, Watson, and a coroner working among frightened witnesses will often borrow their fright rather than fight it. It is easier to write misadventure and let the ghosts keep the road empty than to write murder and have no one left who will walk that road to help you prove it. You think it was murder on the strength of a telegram about spirits and salt duty. I think nothing yet. I observe 2 facts that sit oddly side by side. A man dies on a moor the local people say is haunted, and dies in such a way as to frighten every other man on that moor from crossing it after dark. In the same season, a customs officer at Whitby notices that a coast road across that very moor has stopped carrying anything he can tax. He looked at me over his steepled fingers. Lights that move at a man's pace and halt at gates are not lights at all. They are lanterns, carried by men who know the ground, and a legend that empties a road of witnesses at night is worth a great deal more, to the right sort of businessman, than a bribed constable. You are building a smuggling ring out of a coroner's verdict. I am building nothing yet. I am going to Blackwood to look at the ground, which is a habit I recommend to every detective who would rather be right than merely clever. He was already reaching for the Bradshaw. There is a train from King's Cross at 11 minutes past 10, changing at York, which will have us at the Moor station by the middle of the afternoon. Will you come, or has your practice some prior claim on you today? It had none that could not wait. I sent a note round to old Jackson, who took my Tuesday patients whenever I had reason to be somewhere stranger than Paddington, and by 10 o'clock we were in a cab bound for King's Cross. London wore its own kind of fog that morning, thick and yellow and entirely unhaunted, the sort that closes a city down without asking anyone to believe in ghosts to explain it. I remember thinking, as we crawled past the shrouded lamps of the Euston Road, that a moor's fog at least had the decency to lift by noon. Holmes had the customs telegram in one pocket and the newspaper cutting in the other, and he hummed, for once, something other than his 7 notes. One thing before we go, he said, as the cab turned into the Euston Road. The dead man's name was Nathan Prowse. Remember it. Not every case gives you the victim's name so early, and a name remembered is a debt half paid. Chapter 3. The Crook in the Moss Blackwood is not a village so much as a scattering of stone the moor has not yet reclaimed. There is a church and a smithy, low and grey under a sky, that seemed, that first afternoon, to be considering rain, and never quite committing to it. At the crossroads above the cottages stood the Ling and Feather, an inn with a black roof, and a sign so weathered that the bird painted on it might once have been anything with wings. We were met at the station, such as it was, a platform and a hut, by a big, slow-spoken man with a sergeant's stripes and the look of someone who had been waiting for us with more relief than he cared to show. "Sergeant Yeadon," he said, taking Holmes's hand in a grip that would have troubled a lesser man. "You'll be the London gentleman Mr. Ferris wired about. Sherlock Holmes, this is my friend Dr. Watson. You'll want to see the moor, I expect." "I want to see everything," said Holmes, "beginning with the sky, so that I know what light we have left to work by." There were perhaps 3 hours of afternoon left, grey and thin, and Yeadon walked us up onto the moor at a pace that suggested he did not much want to be there after dark himself. Blackwood Moor rose behind the village in long brown swells, heather and cotton grass, and here and there the black gleam of standing water where the ground had given up trying to be solid. "That's the pool," Yeadon said at last, stopping at the edge of a black hollow perhaps 20 feet across, ringed with sedge, where they found Nathan Prowse. Holmes went down on one knee at the margin and studied the water for a long moment without touching it. "And the crook?" "A mile off, near enough, standing up in the moss, near a wall gate, as if he'd set it down to open the gate and never come back for it." "Show me the gate." We walked the mile, Yeadon leading and Holmes silent, his eyes moving over the ground the whole way with an attention that had nothing idle in it. The gate, when we reached it, was a plain wooden hurdle set into a dry stone wall that ran arrow straight across the moor for as far as I could see in either direction. "He never crossed this ground by day in his life," I said. "A shepherd knows his own moor better than his own hand." "He knew it better than any man alive," said Yeadon, "which is why nobody here believes he wandered onto it by accident. They believe the lights called him." "And what do you believe, Sergeant?" Holmes asked. Yeadon was quiet a moment. "I believe a man is dead. I've a road up here I daren't send my own constable to walk after dark, because he's a young man with a young man's fears, and I won't send him to a fright I can't first explain away myself." There was no shame in the answer, and Holmes did not treat it as though there were. We called that evening on the widow, Sarah Prouse, in a cottage so poor and so scrupulously clean that it told me more of her than the inquest report ever could. A boy of perhaps 8 sat close to the fire, watching us with the stillness of a child who has learned that strangers usually bring bad news. "That's Tom," she said. "His father's boy through and through. He'll not hear a word against him, and nor will I." "No one here asks you to," said Holmes, and it was the gentleness of it, more than anything he said that evening, that told me he believed her. She had not been asked, in all the weeks since the inquest, to simply tell it through in her own words, and once Holmes asked her plainly to do just that, the whole of it came out of her at once, as water comes when a dam is finally opened. "He was a good husband, sir, if that matters to your inquiry," she began. "Never raised his voice to me nor to the boy in 9 years, and never missed a Sunday at the Reverend's church, wet or fine. I tell you that only so you'll know he wasn't a man given to wandering after ghosts for the sport of it. He went out a little after 8, same as he always did on a foggy night, to bring the flock down off the high ground before they strayed. Only that night he stood in the door with his lantern lit, and he looked back at me, which he never did, not once in 9 years of marriage, and he said, 'Sarah, I mean to see something for myself tonight, and I'll tell you of it when I'm home.' I asked him what there was to see on a night like that, and he said nothing more, only smiled at Tom by the fire, and went. I sat up till 2. I told myself, fog slows a man, that was all, fog and a stubborn ewe. By morning I knew better, and by the 3rd day so did the whole village, though none of them would say the word to my face." "What word was that?" Holmes asked, though I think he already knew. "Candles," she said, "that the lights had taken him, same as they've taken others before, though I never once heard tell of another till Nathan. I don't hold with it, Mr. Holmes, whatever the vicar half believes, and the sergeant here is too kind to say plain. My husband was not a fanciful man. He did not go out to chase a ghost story. He went out because he had seen something with his own eyes some night before, and meant to see it again, and be sure." "Did he say what night that was?" "The Tuesday before." "I remember, because it was baking day. Sergeant Yeadon told us afterward what the inquest had already recorded, that a search was raised at first light, and every man in Blackwood able to walk the moor turned out for it, and found nothing that first day, nor the second. It was the 3rd day of searching that found not Nathan himself, but his crook, standing upright, in ground no search party would ordinarily have thought to try, and it was a full week more before they found the man. "They'd not let me see him plain after," Sarah said, quieter now. "The sergeant thought it kindest that I remember him as he went out the door, lantern in hand, not as they found him. I've tried to hold to that, sir, though it isn't always the memory that comes first when I close my eyes." Holmes asked one more question before we rose to leave. "Did your husband ever speak of a debt, Mrs. Prouse? Money owed him, or owed by him?" "He'd not a farthing owing either way," she said, "and I'll thank you not to suggest it, sir, whatever London thinks of moor folk." "I suggest nothing of the kind," said Holmes. "I ask because a man who dies for money generally has some, and your husband, by every account, had none. It is a useful thing to have ruled out early, and it does him no discredit at all." The walk back to the village took us past the churchyard, where a raw mound of earth still marked Nathan Prouse's grave, no stone yet cut for it. Holmes stopped a moment at the low wall, reading the older stones with the same close attention he had given the moor itself. "2 Prowses buried here already," he said. "A grandfather and an uncle, both drowned, both in October, 40 years apart." "Read that stone, and read the date twice." I read it. "Erected to the memory of Josiah Prowse, drowned in the moss, October 1853. "The moor has a habit of drowning Prowses in October," I said slowly, "and a habit, it seems, of blaming the season for it every time. A useful habit, for anyone who understood it and chose to make use of it. A legend 40 years old is not built in a single season. Someone has tended this one a long while, the way a farmer tends a hedge, cutting back what threatens to grow honest and leaving the rest to grow wild. The Reverend Isaac Ray found us there, a stooped, kindly man who had buried both those Prowses and would before long bury Nathan beside them properly, once a stone could be afforded. Folk want the story to be an old one," he said, when Holmes asked him plainly what he believed. "It comforts them more than a new one would." "A ghost that has always been here asks nothing of anyone living. A murderer freshly at work asks a great deal, starting with a name." "And do you have a name, Reverend?" "I have a parish, Mr. Holmes, and 40 years of it, and I have learned not to guess at names from my own pulpit. But I will tell you that the Rudge family has kept the Ling and Feather 3 generations now, and that every one of those 3 generations has told the corpse candle story to every stranger who ever asked word for word the same, as though it were a catechism and not a memory." It was, I thought, as close to an accusation as a clergyman was likely to make against a man who poured his communion wine. We left him among his headstones and walked on toward the inn, without much more said between us. We supped that night at the Ling and Feather. Before the meal was well begun, a second visitor arrived at the inn door, stamping more mud from his boots, with the brisk, put-upon air of a man who counted every hour away from his own office as an hour wasted. "Mr. Holmes, Aldous Ferris, of the board." He shook hands quickly, and sat without being asked twice. "I'd have met your train, only I was 3 hours over the returns for Marsh End, and could not leave them half done." He talked, once the mutton arrived, with the comfortable precision of a man who trusted figures a good deal further than he trusted feelings. "Excise on that stretch of coast had held steady for a dozen years," he told us, rising a little each season as the fishing trade grew, until 3 autumns back, when it had begun to fall, quietly and by no dramatic amount, and had gone on falling ever since. £41 down against the 5-year average this last season alone, and 37 the season before that. A shilling here, 10 shillings there, nothing a man would notice unless he keeps a ledger and compares one year to the next, which I do, because it is the whole of my employment. I raised it with the board the second year. I was told, Mr. Holmes, that moor folk are a superstitious people, and that a haunted road carries less traffic than an honest one, and that the figures would right themselves once the fright wore off. They have not righted themselves. I do not believe in corpse candles, sir. I believe in ledgers, and mine tells me that something is crossing this moor at night that never troubles my office by day. You have visited the inn here before, Mr. Ferris, twice a year, regular as the tide, and always the same answer from mine host. Folk don't move goods across a road they're afraid to walk, he tells me, and smiles, and pours my ale, and I've never once had cause to doubt him until tonight, sitting across a table from a man the board thought worth sending for. At that moment, the landlord himself came to clear our plates, a broad, unhurried man named Caleb Rudge, who greeted Ferris like an old friend and spoke easily of the weather, the price of wool, and, when Yeadon brought it up, the corpse candles themselves, which he discussed with the comfortable authority of a man repeating a story he had told many times before and had long since stopped finding strange. "My grandfather saw them," he said, "and his grandfather before him. They walk before a death, gentlemen, same as they walked before poor Nathan's. I'd not cross that moor by night myself, customs officer or no customs officer, and I've told Mr. Ferris here as much more than once." "And I've believed you each time," Ferris said, not unkindly. "More fool me." It was a good answer Rudge gave, delivered without haste, and I saw nothing in it that any honest innkeeper on any honest road might not have said. Only as we left, crossing the yard behind the inn to reach the lane, did I notice, black against the last grey light, a stack of cut peat behind the outbuilding, taller, I thought idly, than any single hearth could want for even a hard winter. I mentioned it to Holmes as we walked back to our rooms above the smithy. "I noticed it also," he said. "Remember it. Not every detail earns its place in a case at first sight. Some must wait to be asked for." Chapter 4. The Route Table. Dr. Yarrow, who had conducted the post-mortem on Nathan Prowse, was an elderly man with tired eyes and the manner of someone who had written enough certificates of misadventure to have stopped enjoying the phrase. He gave me his original notes without argument, once Holmes had explained who we were and why the Board of Customs cared about a dead shepherd. "I found what any doctor would find in a drowned man," he said. "Water in the lungs, some bruising the moor itself could account for, nothing that called for a different verdict." "May I keep these overnight?" I asked. "A second medical eye rarely hurts and never insults the first." He allowed it, and that night, by the light of a single lamp above the smithy, I read them through twice. The detail that caught me was a small one, noted almost in passing. Dr. Yarrow had found, in the fluid drawn from the dead man's lungs, a quantity of bog moss, finer than any other growth on that moor, and he had recorded the type only because it happened to match the moss growing round the margin of the pool where Prowse was found. I had walked that margin myself. I remembered it as thin sedge and cotton grass, the moss patchy at best, nothing like the dense carpet his note described. I said as much to Holmes over breakfast. "You are telling me," he said, setting down his cup with a precision that told me he was more interested than he wished to appear, "that the moss in the dead man's lungs does not match the moss at the edge of the pool where his body was found." "I am telling you, I mean to find a pool where it does." "Then find it, before the sergeant lets slip to the whole village that we are digging up a settled inquest. A man does not drown in one place and lay himself down a mile off to be discovered in another. Someone did that work for him." I began at first light, working outward from the pool where Prowse had been found in slow, widening rings, testing the water and the moss at every hollow wide enough to trouble a walking man. The sergeant came with me for the first 2 hours, more from curiosity, I think, than duty, and left me to it once he saw how slow and unglamorous a doctor's jar and a doctor's patients truly were. "I tried 4 pools before the 5th answered me. 3 were too shallow to drown a grown man standing, their moss thin and ordinary. A 4th, further out, had moss enough, but lay so far from any path, safe or otherwise, that I could not see why even a determined killer would carry a body so far, only to move it again afterward. By the middle of the afternoon I had my answer. The 5th pool lay some 3/4 of a mile from where Prowse's body had been found, deep and black, thick round its edge, with the same dense moss Yarrow had described, and the bank on one side was broken and trodden anew, as though more than one pair of boots had stood there more than once. Tracing it on my map that evening, I saw it lay almost exactly on a line between the wall gate where the crook had stood and the inn at the crossroads. "He drowned there," I said, showing Holmes the map, "and was carried here." I marked the 2nd pool. "A mile is no great distance for 2 determined men with a hurdle and a length of rope. Or 1 determined man and a pony," said Holmes, "which brings us," At last, to the moor at night. He looked up with the particular brightness that meant the case had stopped being a curiosity and become a hunt. "We watch tonight, Watson, and every night after, until we have counted every light on that moor and timed every halt it makes. A ghost does not keep a timetable. A smuggler cannot help it. We watched for the first time that night from a fold in the ground 1/2 mile north of the pool, where the crook had stood. I lay in the heather from 9 o'clock, and I will set down plainly what a watch of that kind is like, since I do not think I had ever done anything quite so cold, nor quite so strangely satisfying, in the whole of my life before it. The moor by night is a different country from the moor by day. What had looked, that afternoon, like open and honest ground, became, once the light went, a black plain, without a single fixed point to rest the eye on, save the paler line of the sky where it met the hills. Somewhere far to the east I could hear, or thought I could hear, the sea working at the coast, a low sound under the wind that never quite stopped and never quite grew louder. My own breath was the loudest thing near at hand, and I found myself, more than once, holding it without meaning to, for no better reason than that the silence around us seemed to want it held. Nothing moved for the best part of 2 hours but the wind, and once, a curlew that startled us both by rising almost from beneath Holmes's elbow, and once, a light that proved on watching to be no more than a farm window a mile off, opened and shut again as someone crossed a room with a candle. Then, a little after 11, a single true light showed far off across the moor, low down, moving at what I judged, watch in hand, to be very close to 2 miles in the hour. A walking pace, and no faster. A second joined it within 4 minutes. A third within 6 more. By 11:30 there were 5 lights in a single file, each holding a steady distance behind the last, and I had begun, at Holmes's whispered instruction, to note the order. "The 4th light," I whispered. "It's shorter than the rest. See how the beam sits lower. A boy, perhaps, or a small man, or a taller man carrying his lantern low. Mark it all the same." Holmes's eye never left the glass. A short light in the 4th place tonight may be a short light in the 4th place again, and a pattern repeated twice is worth more than a pattern seen once. The file reached a gate in the cross wall, the same wall that ran past the gate where Prowse's crook had stood, though a different gate, further west. There it halted, all 5 lights together, for what I timed at 4 minutes exactly, before moving on and passing out of our sight beyond a rise. We watched again the second night, from a position further west, and counted 6 lights that time, in the same order as before, the short light still 4th, with a halt of 6 minutes at a different gate along the same long wall. "They are marking a road," I said, on our walk back before dawn, gate by gate, the way a shepherd marks a path he means to use again. "They are marking a road they have used many times already," Holmes corrected. "The gates are not obstacles to them, they are stations. A file of laden men, or laden ponies, halts at a gate, for the same reason a train halts at a signal, because someone ahead must check the way is clear before the rest come on. Then someone stands at each gate, or someone stands at one gate only, and passes word ahead by some sign we have not yet seen. We watch again tomorrow and the night after, until the pattern tells us which. By the end of the second night I had, in a notebook I still possess, a rough table of times, distances, and the order of lights across 2 watches. 5 lights one night, 6 the next, each holding its place in file, as steadily as beads on a string. It wanted only a 3rd night to be certain, and a 3rd night, as I have already told the reader, we were given. Chapter 5. Silas Webb. Sergeant Yeadon came to us on the 3rd morning with a theory of his own, and I will say for him that he did not offer it lightly. "There's a man called Silas Webb," he said, "brother to Mrs. Prowse, that keeps a few sheep and fewer scruples on the far side of the moor. He and Nathan had words over grazing rights not 2 months before Nathan died. Hard words, by what I hear. And Webb's not above running a still of his own when the excise men aren't looking." "You think Webb killed his brother-in-law over a boundary dispute?" said Holmes, "and dressed the death as a ghost story to keep the moor empty while he worked. I think it fits, Mr. Holmes, and I'd sooner it were one bad man than a whole countryside of them." It was not, I confess, an unreasonable wish. We rode out that afternoon to Webb's holding, a low croft set into a fold of the moor with a still, unmistakable, standing half-hidden behind the byre. It was a poorer place even than Sarah Prouse's cottage, 1 room and a lean-to, a low fire smoking sullen in the grate, and a single shelf of crockery that looked as though it had never held more than it held that afternoon. 3 thin sheepdogs lay by the door and eyed us with more suspicion than their master troubled to show. Webb himself, a lean, watchful man, met us at his gate with the stillness of someone deciding how much to admit. "I'll not deny the still," he said, when Holmes had made our business plain. "A man's got to live, and the excise don't feed my sheep for me. But I never touched Nathan, whatever his wife may have told you. You quarrelled with him. Over 3 yards of wall and a dozen sheep, aye. And I'd have quarrelled with my own father, over less." "That's not killing, Mr. Holmes. You knew the moor road better than most men, Mr. Webb," Holmes said. "Better, perhaps, than Nathan Prowse himself. I know where a man can walk it and where he can't, if that's your meaning. Any shepherd does. Have you seen the lights yourself?" Webb's hand, resting on the gatepost, tightened slightly before he answered. "Every man on this moor has seen the lights, sir, one time or another. I'll not pretend different to please a London gentleman." "And did you believe, seeing them, that they walked before a death?" "I believed," said Webb slowly, "that a wise man keeps to his own side of the wall after dark, whatever walks on the other side of it, and asks no more questions than that. It struck me, hearing it, as the most honest thing any man in Blackwood had said to us since our arrival, and the most carefully unhelpful." Holmes asked him a dozen further quiet questions about his still, his takings, his habits after dark, and Webb answered every one without hesitation, save the last. "Where were you?" Holmes asked. "On the night Nathan Prowse died." For the first time, Webb's eyes went past us, to the byre. "Here," he said, "seeing to a ewe that was near her time. I noticed, though I said nothing then, that the ewe in question, penned close by, showed every sign of having lambed a full month before, not on the October night in question. It was clear enough to any man who has kept animals that Webb's account did not match his own sheep." We rode back to the village in a thoughtful silence Holmes broke only once, halfway down the moor track. "He is lying about that night, Watson. You think him guilty, then? I think him guilty of something, which is not the same charge. A man who lies about one night generally has a reason of his own. Silas Webb's reason, unless I am much mistaken, has 4 legs, and was not near her time in October at all. He was somewhere he does not wish his sister to know of, and a man hiding a small shame will often let you believe him capable of a large one, if it keeps you from asking about the small." That evening, Yeadon pressed his theory harder over supper, and I found myself, for the first time in the case, half persuaded by it. It explained the quarrel. It explained the body moved, and the crook left standing, if Webb had wanted the moor to look haunted, rather than murdered. It even explained, after a fashion, why the road might have gone quiet, if Webb wanted no witnesses near his own still. Holmes let the sergeant finish before he answered. "Your theory explains 1 dead man and 1 guilty conscience, Sergeant, and I do not doubt Webb has a conscience worth examining on some other matter entirely. It does not explain 3 seasons of quiet excise returns on a road Webb has walked, by his own admission, only since his quarrel began. Nor does it explain that great black stack behind the ling and feather, cut and laid by more hands, and over more time, than one poacher with a grudge could ever spare from his sheep. And it does not explain, he added, more quietly, why the file of lights we have watched has grown by 1 man each night, 5 and then 6, when a boundary dispute needs no growing army to settle it. Yeadon had no answer to that, and to his credit, he did not pretend to one. "Then who?" he said. "That," said Holmes, "is what the moor itself will tell us, if we ask it properly, in daylight, on our feet, rather than lying in wet heather, guessing at shadows after dark. Tomorrow, Sergeant, I should like to walk that wall from end to end, gate by gate." Chapter 6. The Causeway. We walked the wall from its northern end, where it met the coast road, to its southern end, where it ran out against the churchyard at Blackwood. It took the better part of a full day, with Yeadon counting gates aloud as we came to each one, and marking them in his pocketbook, 1 to 15 in all, spaced at uneven intervals along nearly 4 miles of stone. Ferris joined us a little before noon, his ledger tucked under one arm like a soldier's kit, and matched each gate we passed against a column of figures only he could properly read. "Gate 4, he said, consulting his book as we came level with it. "Nearest the coast road proper. Returns from the toll bar there have held steadier than anywhere else on this stretch. I never once thought to ask why, until this morning." "Because it is the one gate this road does not use," said Holmes. "A false trail keeps its shape best where nobody troubles to walk it." The first 6 gates gave us nothing beyond ordinary moor, wet ground, and old stone, and, at the third, a dead ewe that had been dead a great deal longer than October. It was at the 7th gate that I first saw what Holmes had already, I think, half expected. "Look here," I said. "The moss is firm." Where the ground on either side of the gate sank underfoot in the sullen way of the moor, a strip perhaps 3 feet wide ran straight through the gateway and on across the open moss beyond it. It bore my full weight without a tremor. Kneeling to look closer, I saw why. It had been laid, not grown. Fresh peat, cut in long blocks, packed edge to edge below the surface, renewed what must once have been an old track across ground the ordnance map, when Yeadon produced it, marked plainly as untrodden. "How wide?" Holmes asked. I paced it, wide enough for 2 men abreast, or 1 led pony. Where the ground beyond the gate had softened after the night's rain, I found the clean print of a shod hoof, small and neat, no farm horse's mark but a pony's, and beside it the narrower print of a man's boot heel, sunk twice as deep into the soft margin as it sank into the firm strip itself. It was proof enough, if any were still wanted, that the firm ground was no accident of nature. We followed that firm strip a full half-mile beyond the gate. It did not waver. It did not sink. It ran true as a drawn line toward a fold in the ground that Yeadon told us hid the old coast track down to Marsh End. "No crofter cuts a road like this, Watson," said Holmes, crouching at the edge of the strip and working a block free with his stick to examine its cut face. "See how square it is laid, and how deep. A man cutting for his own fire takes what is easiest to hand. He does not trouble himself with a line 4 miles long. This is engineering, done by men who mean to use this ground again and again, in every season, for years. And renewed," I said, which is the part that struck me first. I pointed to 2 places where the surface showed a paler, fresher edge against darker, older cuttings beneath. This has been done more than once. Every autumn, perhaps, before the winter floods can drown the old work, which tells us something Sergeant Yeadon's theory could not. said Holmes, rising. "This is not one bad man working alone against a season's opportunity. This is a road maintained, year on year, by men with labor to spare and the discipline to keep it quiet. Silas Webb has neither. We reached, that afternoon, the 9th gate along the wall, a plain hurdle set where the stones met a shallow fold in the ground. The fold hid the causeway from the coast road on one side, and from the inn's chimneys on the other. It was a natural meeting place for two lines of sight that could see each other and be seen by neither road nor village. "This is where they halt longest," I said, checking my notebook. 4 minutes the first night, 6 the second. If the pattern holds a third time, it will be longer again. "It is where they halt because it is the one place the man from the inn can reach them unseen from either direction." Holmes turned to the sergeant. "How soon do the floods come to this ground?" "Any week now, sir, once the autumn rains set in proper. A fortnight, 3 weeks at the outside, and half this moss will be under water that won't clear till spring." Then a man running a seasonal trade who must move his last cargo before his own road drowns beneath him has very little time left to do it. Holmes looked out along the darkening wall, toward the inn's chimneys, faint now against the last grey light. "We have watched 2 nights and learned the shape of the thing. I think we shall not need a fourth. Whatever crosses this moor tonight, or tomorrow night at the latest, will be the last of the season, and the largest, and it will halt, as it has halted twice before, at this gate." Chapter 7. The 9th Gate. Sergeant Yeadon placed 4 constables himself that afternoon, borrowed from Whitby and sworn to silence. 2 waited in the fold behind the 9th gate, and 2 further back along the coast track, where the causeway ran down toward Marsh End. Holmes and I took the same low rise we had used on the first night, half a mile off, with the glass, my notebook, and a police whistle that Holmes had asked for and that I had not thought, until that moment, to question. "Why the whistle?" I asked, as we settled into the heather for the 3rd time, when a shout would carry us far. A shout tells a man which direction to run from. A whistle only tells him to run. He did not lower the glass as he said it. I would rather they scattered blind for 3 seconds than clever for 1. We lay there from 10 o'clock, the cold coming up out of the ground exactly as it had the 2 nights past. For the best part of 2 hours, I found myself almost hoping for nothing more than a repetition, some part of me grown fond, in a way I would not have predicted, of that particular cold and that particular waiting. It was not to be so quiet a night. A little after 11 the first light showed, low and steady, and I began, from old habit now, to count in a whisper. A second joined it, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. I marked with some private satisfaction that the fourth still walked lower than the rest. By the time the 7th had fallen into line, I had counted exactly what I had counted the first night I ever lay in that heather, and the reader has already had that count from me once, and shall not have it dragged out a second time. The 7 lights held their file. They reached the 9th gate. They halted together, as they had always halted, and a moment later the wind carried, for one breath, the raw, sharp smell that told us the season's spirits were on the move. Holmes's hand found my wrist, exactly as it had before, and this time I understood why. He was not stopping my count. He was waiting for the 9th. It came on from the direction of the inn, low and unhurried, and joined the tail of the file at the gate, and the moment it did, Holmes came up out of the heather and put the whistle to his lips. The sound of it, thin and vicious across all that silence, seemed to me the loudest thing I had ever heard. What followed I remember less as a sequence of separate events than as a single confusion, out of which certain pictures stand clear even now. Dark figures broke from the heather on either side of the gate. Lanterns dropped and rolled dead into the moss, their light snuffed out against the wet ground. A pony reared in its traces, and a man's voice, high with fright, shouted a name that was not Rudge's. I ran myself, across ground I could not see, my ankle turning twice on hidden stone, until I came up hard against a man half my size and twice my desperation. He went down under me into the moss with a grunt that knocked the wind clean out of him, and lay still enough after that for me to hold him until one of Yeadon's constables came up to take him off my hands. Somewhere off to my left, I heard Yeadon's own voice, low and hard, ordering a man to drop what he carried, and then the dull clatter of a blade struck from a hand onto stone. Nearer at hand, one of the coast agents broke past a constable's grasp and ran 3 strides before the ground itself finished what the constable had failed to, pitching him full length into a soft margin that held him fast by the knees until 2 men hauled him free, cursing weakly, plainly more frightened of the bog than of the law that had caught him in it. At the gate itself, Caleb Rudge had tried to run for the wall. Sergeant Yeadon, who moved with a speed I would not have credited in so large a man, had him by the collar before he had gone 10 steps. Rudge fought, briefly and without much skill, a landlord's fight and not a soldier's. In the struggle his coat tore along one seam, and something inside it, sewn flat against the lining, came loose and swung free. Holmes had it in his hand before Rudge had finished cursing. It was a map, drawn in a careful, practiced hand on oiled paper, marking every gate along the wall, numbered 1 to 15, with times set against several of them, and a route running down from the inn to Marsh End that matched, gate for gate, the table I myself had built across 3 cold nights in the heather. "You kept a better record than I did, Mr. Rudge," said Holmes, "though mine, I fancy, will stand up rather better in a court of law." Rudge said nothing at all, which I thought, in the circumstances, showed better sense than anything else he had done that night. Ferris came up from the village at a run some minutes later, lantern swinging wildly at the end of his arm, and stood at the 9th gate, looking down at the seized map, with an expression I can only describe as 5 years of frustration finally being allowed to rest. By midnight, it was over. 2 coast agents had bolted across the moss and been run down by Yeadon's men within a quarter mile. A drover surrendered without a struggle the moment he saw the whistle, had brought more men than he had bargained for. Rudge himself sat on the very gate his lanterns had halted at for 3 nights running, wrists bound, and said nothing until Holmes crouched in front of him and asked, quietly, whether he had known Nathan Prowse. "Everyone knew Nathan Prowse," Rudge said at last. Something in his voice, tired now and past all pretending, told me we had the whole of it, or very nearly. Chapter 8. The Peat Stack. We dug the peat stack behind the Ling and Feather at first light, Yeadon's men working with spades while Ferris stood by with a lantern of his own, no longer needing anyone's excuse for the empty road. It did not take long. Under the second layer of cut turves lay a dozen long crates, greased and close-packed, and inside them, when the lid of the first was forced, rifles, new from a Birmingham maker, stamped and oiled, and ready for a coast that was not this one. "Spirits pay for a man's silence," Holmes said, standing over the open crate. "Rifles pay for his death, if he will not stay silent. Nathan Prowse followed those lights once too often, Sergeant, and saw more than a keg of brandy crossing the moor. He saw what was under it. A man who might talk about smuggled spirits can be bribed or ignored. A man who might talk about smuggled rifles bound for the Irish coast cannot be trusted to keep quiet at any price, and so Rudge did not pay him. He drowned him instead in a pool a mile from where he wished the body found, and left the crook standing to let the moor's own ghosts take the blame. He'd have got away with it too, Yeadon said, if the county hadn't noticed its takings gone thin. He would have got away with it, said Holmes, if a doctor's careful note about a mouthful of bog moss had not found its way into the hands of a man willing to walk out and check it against the ground itself. He nodded once toward me and said nothing further on the point, which was, from Holmes, thanks enough. Ferris spent the better part of an hour crouched over the opened crates, totting figures into his book, with the quiet satisfaction of a man permitted at last to close an account left open far too long. 3 seasons, he said, half to himself, and not a shilling of it wasted on ghosts, whatever the board believed. He looked up. I shall enjoy writing this report, Mr. Holmes, more than I have enjoyed writing any report in 11 years of service. Yeadon, meanwhile, had the drover under guard by the stable wall, a slow, frightened man named Amos Kell, and it was Yeadon who spoke for him before anyone else could be asked to. He never knew what he carried past the first crate or two, sir. Rudge kept his own counsel about that, same as he kept it from most everyone in the parish. Then let him give his evidence honestly at the assizes, said Holmes, and I shall say as much myself, if it is asked of me. A frightened man who tells the truth once he is caught has generally earned the chance to go on being frightened somewhere other than a cell. We called on Sarah Prouse that same afternoon and told her plainly what her husband had died for and what he had not died of. She heard it through without a word, her hand resting the whole time on Tom's shoulder, and when Holmes had finished, she said only that she was glad, in a voice that did not sound glad at all, and I understood that gladness and grief can share a single roof without either one making room for the other. He'll want to hear he wasn't fool enough to be led by a ghost, she said at last, looking down at her son. That much I can give him now. We took the last train south 3 days later, once Rudge and his 2 coast agents had been committed for trial, and the drover, on Holmes's word, let go with a caution he seemed to regard as the best fortune of his life. Yeadon walked us to the platform himself. The road's open again, he said. I had a boy carry a message up to Marsh End last night, for the plain pleasure of it, and no one thought twice about the hour. Rudge and his 2 coast agents stood trial at the York Assizes some weeks after, on charges the clerk of the court read out in a voice so flat that smuggled rifles sounded almost as dull as smuggled brandy, though I am told none of the jurymen looked dull hearing it. We did not stay in Yorkshire to see the verdict ourselves, our own part in the matter being finished, but Sergeant Yeadon wrote to us afterward, in a hand better suited to a pocket-book than a letter, to say that the sentences had satisfied him, and that the Ling and Feather had a new landlord by spring, a cheerful widower from Whitby who kept, so far as anyone could tell, no secrets larger than a weak hand at cards. I have been back to Blackwood only once since, the following Christmas, at Holmes's own suggestion. Nathan Prouse's grave had its stone by then, plain grey stone, paid for, discreetly, out of a fund the Board of Customs saw fit to raise for it, and Tom had grown, in 4 short months, into a taller and quieter boy than I remembered, though he shook my hand like a man grown when Holmes introduced us properly for the first time. I set down here the last thing I saw of that moor before our train drew out of the valley. A single lantern, small and steady, moved along the wall road well after dark, carried by some farmer bound home to his own fire, unhurried, unafraid, and entirely his own business. It did not halt at any gate. There was no reason left for it to.